Investing out of town is all the rage, especially if you're chasing cash flow, but it's not without substantial risks. If you're set on it, I'll show you how to do it. My name is Ryan Dossey. I live in San Diego and I remotely invest back in the Midwest. Got a team there and we've done hundreds of projects over the years. The first thing that you've really got to get figured out is your team on the ground or your boots on the ground. Effectively, who's going to be doing the work that you don't want to do? You're living somewhere else and you don't want to go live in this more affordable market. Who are going to be the folks that you can count on? Your team is typically going to include a real estate agent so they can run comps and make sure you're getting a good deal. Somebody that can oversee the construction, not only large scale remodel, but also more handyman type tasks. And lastly, somebody to help with actually getting the properties closed and more the legal side. Could be a title company or a closing attorney, depending on your state. One of the biggest pitfalls that I see come into play here is the Cali tax. I used to live in Indianapolis. That's why I invest there. And while I was living there, I routinely bought houses from California investors for 50 cents on the dollar from what they paid. It wasn't that I was taking advantage of them. It was that they way overpaid because they were like, what do you mean I can get a house for $200K? A house here in San Diego is $1 million. Just because it's cheap doesn't mean it's a great deal. I often see the temptation to romanticize the relationship between out-of-town investor and local boots on the ground of oh, these are my people, these are my business partners, but they're not. They are vendors or service providers. An agent that tells you something's going to be a fantastic deal when you lose money on it isn't picking up half the tab. Similarly, when your contractor runs into more than they were anticipating, you're getting a change order. They're not working for free. One thing I would just be completely remiss if I didn't mention, somebody being a real estate agent or a realtor does not make them brilliant or a good investor. A lot of real estate agents don't understand what the cost of construction is or how it affects value. They'll be like, well, it's below estimate, it's a great deal, or it's in an appreciating area. If they're having to sell you on why it's a good deal in the future, that means it's probably a bad deal for you now. The second thing you have to do is go and visit the market and realistically go lay eyes on a property before you close on it. There's no 30-day return policy with a house. If you bought a bad deal, if you paid too much money for it, great deal for the seller, but you can't give it back. Your best case scenario is either you're losing money or hoping you find another sucker that will take your spot. Plane ticket to most affordable markets is going to be under $1,000. This could be the cheapest $1,000 you ever spend versus you buying a project you lose $20, $30, $40, or $50,000 on. Oftentimes though, I'll see out-of-state investors not do it. They just try to manage everything from afar, up in the castle, and just assume it'll all go well. And that's when they end up taking a bath. There was a group in Indy a few years ago that promised turnkey flipping and turnkey remodels. Their model was they would find the deal for you, they would manage the construction, and you would make all of this profit, and they would place a tenant for you. The reality, what ended up happening was they would take your purchase and your remodel dollars and then go and do the same to somebody else. They wouldn't even get your house remodeled, but they would start paying you rent out of your rehab budget. So you were collecting rent from a tenant that didn't exist in a house that wasn't inhabitable. The third thing that you 100% have to process out is your systems, your policies, and your procedures. What are we going to run into and what will we do when that happens? For instance, you're doing a remodel. Your contractor, your boots on the ground, your buddy that you found says, hey, the work's been completed, I'm ready to get paid. Every time a contractor has ever told me it's done, there's still punch list stuff. And that last 10% is almost as annoying as the front 90. Typical out-of-state investors great, you've been paid. Then they find out, well, wait, can you come back? There's more stuff to do. And once you've released that final payment, good luck. Other things you're going to run into is you've got a tenant that wants to tour the place. How do you get them access? Well, your real estate agent likely isn't going to want to run over there to show a rental that's a $700-800 studio unit in a rougher part of town because you're chasing cash flow. You have to process that out in some way. Another super common thing you're going to run into is emergency maintenance requests. Hey, the furnace went out, or hey, the toilet's overflowing. Well, what if your contractor doesn't want to go do that work? Who are you going to send out? What if that person's sick? My wife's a Navy psychologist, and one of the things the military requires families to do is like contingency plans. They call it a family care plan. So if she needs to get deployed, who's watching the kids? And then what's the backup for the backup should that not work? That way there's never a situation where she can't do her job. How that looks in real estate is if your first choice is unavailable and your second choice isn't picking up the phone, who's your third choice? And has that relationship been established so you're not getting raked through the coals calling an emergency plumber at 1 a.m. on Christmas? A couple of just simple kind of software tools and tricks that you might consider. One of the tools that we use is something called Company Cam. It's basically like photo documentation of construction, gives you a timeline. You can use it to do things like check-ins and check-outs. So how long was somebody at the job site, or what progress did they get done at that day? It's pretty hard to tell if a project's moving from 1,000 miles away, but if you pull up the Company Cam timeline and you see there's been no updates in 2 weeks, chances are nobody's been there for 2 weeks. We used to self-manage 150 units in Indianapolis, and one of the ways we did that was with a tool called Show Mojo. Not only did it like syndicate out our rental listings everywhere, there was also some automation with like drip sequences that would follow up with interested parties trying to get them to book a tour. Then when somebody wanted to book a tour, they had to verify their ID, verify a form of payment, pay like a $1 to $5 fee, and then they could self-tour the place. We never had any problems with anybody trashing the house, but it made it that I didn't have to go run and do showings or send somebody out to go and do showings at on a Saturday at noon. One of the key things to remember, though, is that your boots on the ground are not your staff. You cannot tell them what to do. You can ask, you can communicate your preferences, but at the end of the day, if they're not going to do things how you want them done, you're going to have to find somebody else to do it. You can't like force them to it. I've seen remote investors try this. We're like, oh, my guy won't use Company Cam. All right, well, he's probably not the guy then, but you can't force him to do it if he doesn't want to do it. The fourth thing to take into account is this whole thing is going to be easier if it's a market that you already spend time in, or if you have people there that you know, like, and trust. You might live in Seattle, but if you've got family back in Michigan, maybe your little brother wants to help with this. That is a way sexier proposal of, hey, can you swing by and check on the thing, versus like, all right, let me see if I can convince an agent to go look at 10 houses for me, knowing I'm probably not going to buy any of them. The bulk of my investing has been done in markets I either lived in and built partnerships or teams there, or it's where I've been currently at. I didn't remotely decide to flip houses in Pensacola, Florida. I flipped houses when I lived in Pensacola, Florida with a friend. I didn't remotely decide, hey, let me keep investing in Indianapolis. Noah and I started working together, became business partners, and have just kept it rolling now for the last, 7 or 8 years. The fifth thing you need is an extreme attention to detail. The average investor doesn't want to do this anyway, but you being remote, it is crucial. If somebody's at Home Depot buying materials that you're paying for, you need to understand how many materials should actually be going to that job site. Back when we ran 150 units, we had in-house maintenance. And guess what? We were reviewing receipts one time. It's like, I know you're working on that house. I see on the receipt, there's a $300-400 charge for a Simply Safe security system, but I was just at the property. There's not a security system there. Where did that go? Oh, it went to your house. Oh, you were going to pay me back. Guess who no longer works for me? The average out-of-town investor doesn't really understand construction, is going to have no way of knowing if somebody's buying materials on their dime for another job. You would want to do things like understand if they're putting in cabinets, how many feet of cabinets, if they're pouring concrete, how many yards? If they're doing a roof, how many squares? To understand, are you paying for another project on top of yours? The sixth thing is kind of like two maybe alternatives. One you could consider would be looking at more like satellite markets. You might live in, say, Tampa. I've got a guy I work with right now, lives in Tampa, but invests a couple hours north, more up in the Ocala area. Way cheaper cost per acquisition, better cash flow. It's a couple hours from him, but it's worth it for what he makes on an annual basis. Another option might be like what a couple of my private lenders did early on. They were partners with me. It was per deal. It wasn't like a formal LLC structure, but they brought the capital and I did the work on the ground, and profits were split, so our incentives were aligned. Out-of-state investors often assume that they're going to be treated like local investors, but even if you try to hide it, at some point it's going to come up. You're going to send a wire and it's going to be past the cutoff for the local time. Or somebody's going to say, hey, can you meet me for coffee tomorrow? And you have to about that. typically folks that are local and present in the market are always going to have a competitive edge. If I have a problem with zoning or permits, I can physically drive down, put a face to a name or a permit number, build value in our project, see why we're getting hung up, and try to push it across the finish line. I've got some friends of mine that live in California and remotely invest in Ohio, but they spend substantial amounts of time in Ohio. They were there for like all of last quarter because they got, quote, way more done when they were there in person. Nobody wants to have to step in and get their hands dirty, particularly my like out of town investor crowd. But when you have something like an emergency and you're 10 minutes away and you can swing over and fix it, it's way better than making 3 or 4 or 5 phone calls or having to wait till the next day before you get a call back to be able to address things like that. I'm a firm believer real estate investing is difficult enough without adding extra distance to the equation. If you want to learn how to find great deals off market, that's what we're here for. Like and subscribe if you haven't already. Feel free to even book a free strategy session with me. If you're out of town hoping to do this remotely, I'm just going to be honest with you, it's going to be harder.